Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. This is Q&A session 16, and it is our 160th episode. We can't tell you how much it means to us to have you listening here in your podcast apps, watching the show on YouTube, and leaving us such great feedback and reviews. It really is an honor, and it keeps us motivated to keep on making this thing, so we really appreciate it. And one of our favorite ways we like to say thanks for all your support is by answering your questions. So we will be doing just that today with Jeff Alberts, Alberto Nunez, and Brad Loomis, our 3 head coaches. Almost all of the questions from this episode came from the case study Q&A page on our website, which you can always find at 3dmusclejourney.com/QA. And a couple of these also came from Instagram comments, so feel free to stay active with us there as well. Our IG handle is at Team3DMJ. Topics covered in this show today will include Valsalva, bracing and passing out, when to end an extended cutting phase for non-competitors, the duration of newbie gains and what to expect as they slow down, using mini cuts to stay lean year-round, the use and misuse of body fat percentages, estimating how many pounds you are away from stage weight, how we do refeeds and what days they should fall on, how we know when it's time to adjust cardio assignments, and tons more, a lot more all throughout. There's banter. It's a good time. The guys are great. You'll hear a lot of stories about themselves and their athletes. So yeah, stick around for the whole thing. As always, if you have any feedback or comments on this episode in particular, go to 3dmusclejourney.com or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Team3DMJ. Leave it under podcast number 160. Let's get into it. Here is Q&A session 16 with Brad Loomis, Jeff Alberts, and Alberto Nunez.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being on.
Pleasure's all mine and Jeff's, Brad.
See, I don't even have to say it. Yeah. Berto's going to talk for me the whole episode. I'm just going to sit here and let my nice glistening head kind of highlight the podcast.
All right, let's dive right into this. We're going to go into question number 1. I've had this problem, feeling of lightheadedness or passing out completely, when lifting heavy objects both in and out of the gym. This only happens to me when doing the barbell overhead press. It has also happened to me when lifting very heavy objects outside of the gym to about chest height that require bracing. Some people have this problem with the deadlift, but personally, I have not had this problem with any pulling movements. Thanks so much. Love all the content. Take care. So I'm just going to go ahead and run with this, guys, if you're okay with it, because I've had problems with Valsalva and passing out with many things that I do, not only in the gym, but outside of the gym. But basically, we should probably start that it's what causes it, right? And usually it's always a blood pressure issue. And it has to do with vasodilation versus vasoconstriction. And I'm not really going to talk too much about that because I don't know the actual mechanics of it. But basically on the blood pressure front, what happens there is you get a rapid drop in blood pressure. So you basically go from regular blood pressure to like just temporarily like 50 over 30. And when that happens, the brain just kind of shuts off. And it's kind of an odd feeling. It's just for a split second, the lights go out and you just wake up and what happened? So, it happened to me at USAPL Raw Nationals on the platform. I finished my lift, put it down, took one step back, and I fell asleep. It's just kind of what it feels like. You just fall asleep for a second. I wake up, they're jiggling my belt, trying to get my belt off, and I'm fine. And I'm just like, holy crap, did I get the lift? You know?
I was going to say, you got the lift, right?
I did get the lift. Yeah. It's in our 3DMJ folklore somewhere. I think Alberto made a very comical post of me going through the various stages
animation
of
bit.
Yeah. Stop action,
Stop
like
motion,
we were talking
right?
about. Yeah, right before we started the podcast, stop action. Brad's just slowly going down until he's on this back with his feet pointing out. But a lot of times this has to do with sodium. And we see this a lot in not only our power lifters who are cutting weight, they're trying to lose water weight, but also just in bodybuilders who are eating super, super, super clean. What ends up happening is their sodium levels basically start going way down because, number one, they're not eating a whole lot of food. Number two, that the food that they're usually eating is very clean. It's often high in potassium, which, believe it or not, is kind of the antithesis of sodium. And so what happens is you have very low sodium levels. And as we all know, what do you tell people that have high blood pressure? Well, to combat high blood pressure, you take in lower sodium, because lower the sodium, lower the blood pressure, higher the sodium, the higher the blood pressure. So oftentimes a result of having chronically low sodium is whenever you do bracing, whenever you basically kind of are bearing down in order to lift heavy objects of any sort, when you're done, you get this rapid drop in blood pressure. And if you've already got low blood pressure, say that it's normally running about 90 over 50, well, I mean, you just need a little drop and the lights are going to go out for a second. So my remedy for this oftentimes is just have a little sodium. Have a little sodium before your workout. A lot of times I just pretend like I'm having a little shot of tequila, lick my hand, sprinkle a little salt on there, lick it again. It's usually pretty quick.
That's why you fell over. You actually drank tequila before you lifted.
And boy, you guys know how I'm a lightweight, right? But almost always with just a little shot of sodium will usually take care of that if it is truly a vasovagal response.
What about Gatorade or something like that? Would that suffice or not so much?
It's a lot of times it's not enough sodium.
Gotcha.
It's kind of like trying to kill that elephant with a BB gun. It's kind of a lesson in futility. And oftentimes, I mean, while that is just a quick fix to just kind of get you through your workout or get you through your activity of whatever it is you have to go, usually the permanent fix is you just need to start adding more sodium to your foods so that you normally have higher blood pressure than the possibly chronically low blood pressure that you already have. And so, yeah, a lot of times you just have to add more sodium to your diet is kind of the bottom line. But Bert, I know you have a little bit to add onto this.
More so just that, yeah, I've experienced it. Even more so when I am prepping, it becomes a slightly bigger issue. In terms of remedies, what I've found to help me is, so I think especially with a deadlift, a movement with and this is where, I mean, not necessarily for this person, but I think where most people have experienced it at some point is a deadlift. Just not starting my Valsalva any earlier than I need to, so just being a little bit more efficient with it, basically. Because I remember a few years back it was Valsalva, pump up, and now it's when I do deadlift, it's a little bit more last minute, but that just comes with repetition and trusting your form, and I think the amount of pressure you need for a deadlift I don't think it's nearly as much as say a squat, whereas I mean there's some powerlifters that actually prefer to pull without belts, for example, so yeah, what's helped me a lot is just basically just condensing the whole act, the way that baseball players kind of step into the plate basically before they do their thing. So I've kind of made my little routine a little smaller, but yeah, no, it's not fun the first few times. Once it's happened to you more than a few times, it's just one of those things where you're okay, let me just hold on to something. And you got to watch where you're deadlifting sometimes too, because you just don't know. There are videos out there of that you would have been okay with the fall, but there was something behind the athlete, and that thankfully in most of the ones I've seen they were okay, but yeah, pretty scary stuff. Yours was, you had a whole crowd of people. If there's a safe place to pass out, it's probably USAPL Nationals. Everyone stormed to get the belt off you. I remember that one because there was two thumps. I missed your deadlift because the crowd was just too big. So I just had my phone up and I'm I hope I got this. And then once, I heard the down command, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, we're good. And as I'm running to the back, I hear the last thump, and I'm like, oh, okay. And from the side, from the back of the platform, I'm just see a crowd of people just basically dragging you out. So that's got to be a highlight, man.
Yeah. I think it was actually Eric made the stop action from the actual live stream that they had on the YouTube channel. I think he was the one that actually did it. But yeah, when it happens and when you see like those epic gym fails of people passing out, it's like you see it happening. It's like somebody grabbed that dude before, and then it's like too late. Dude's down. But you can see it happening. It's like somebody saved that dude, help him, and then thump, So, Jeff, you have anything to chime in on this?
Not really. Yeah, not really. Well, I guess the only thing that I've experienced, I'd never passed out, but I've experienced a lot of lightheadedness every time I do hyperextensions. So it's usually a delay too. Like once I'm done, I stand up. And then once I stand up, like 3 seconds later, I'm like, okay, hold on to something because I'm ready to fall over because I'm super dizzy. Mm-hmm. And it usually takes me about 5-10 seconds to kind of collect myself, and then I'm good. But every set, it doesn't matter. And it's usually when I'm doing heavier hyperextensions. Like body weight doesn't really do it. It's more like when I'm have a lot more exertion going on where I'm noticing that. Mm-hmm. So I think Thursday, that's my next leg day. I'm gonna do hyperextensions. I'm gonna pump some salt in first and see if that makes a difference.
Yeah, which would be interesting to find out, because it almost kind of sounds like what you're experiencing is less of a vasovagal response, and maybe just like your blood is rushing to your head, and then when you're done, it's like your blood is leaving your head, and so it's just kind of like for just a split second there, it's just kind of starved a little bit because it's kind of like what do you call that? An overcompensation of blood flow to your head, maybe. So it would be curious to find out if the sodium does help.
We'll see. I'll try it. I'll let you know. But that's all I got. I don't have too much else to offer.
All right, fellas, should we move on? I feel like we pretty much got that one taken care of, yeah?
Yeah.
All right, question 2. I am 41 years old, 5'7", 163 pounds, and about 20% body fat, down from 28% a year ago. Way to go, bud. That's pretty righteous. My goal is to get around 15% and see where I am visually. However, being brand new to lifting, under a year total, and under 6 months what I would call quote-unquote educated, I'm a little bit torn between continuing to recomp or trying to simply build muscle. How long do quote-unquote newbie gains last? 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? I'm happy with the progress I've been making so far, but in 5 years, don't want to find out I could have gained much more muscle and made the getting lean process easier at higher body weight but similar body fat percentage. Okay, guys, so let's summarize this. He's already lost a lot of weight, 28% down to 20%. Don't know what his starting weight was, but he's down to 163. He wants to get down to 15%. And he's fairly new to lifting. He's probably under a year.
Didn't say how much time he was actually spent getting from 28 to 20%.
Well, let's see, because we do have a little bit more context. Let me see here.
Because he's only been lifting a year, and so how much of that time has he been spent in a deficit?
It sounds like, Jeff, because it says here about 20% body fat, down from 28% a year ago. So this sounds like he's recently gone through all of this. Like his whole journey has started basically a year ago. Lifting, losing body fat, kind of recomping. And so now it sounds like he's kind of just questioning whether or not he should continue on his goal to get to 15%, or if he should just kind of maintain things for a little bit. Because it all boils down to, okay, I'm still basically a beginner / newbie in the gym. I'm only a year old. And he's worried about like running out of his newbie type adaptations, I guess you might say, and possibly wasting this time. Because I can kind of relate to this. I mean, me, myself, I basically bodybuild for about 2 years. And then I started competing, and I started getting ready for my competition. And sometimes I kind of almost regret that. it's like I probably should have went more like about 4 or 5 years bodybuilding before I competed. You know what I mean? Because I felt like I could have made some further gains there after that 2-year mark. So I can kind of relate to him. He's saying, okay, I've done great things in this year that I have been doing this, but at the same time, if I continue to cut down to 15%, am I losing out on my beginner type gains here after having done this for only a year? So I can kind of relate to this guy a little bit, just looking at my own history. Alberto, you're shaking your head and nodding. What do you got?
Well, first of all, congrats to him, because he's about my age, right? Something like that.
41. So
okay, that's close enough. We might have gone to high school together. Yeah. I think first of all, kudos to you for getting rolling with that, because I think this is one of those, like many hobbies or many things maybe you should have done for yourself, like whether it's going back to school for continued education, investing, whatever, like most people kind of get on that, like, oh, it's too late train, but it's like, hey, at some point this is going to be too late, so I guess there's no day like today, right? What I will say is that I think I think he's a lifer at this point, especially given all the results he's seen so far. Like, that's enough positive reinforcement to keep you rolling with it for a minute. But I think my biggest worry now would be like, hey, let's make this as comfortable as possible. So I think when you see a good amount of weight loss, I think there should be periods of time where you're kind of focusing on just maintaining weight, as opposed to trying to maybe lose more or maybe even gain some muscle. It's like, hey, let's kind of work on this skill, because maybe he was maintaining his start weight like for a few years, where he was just kind of roaming back and forth there. It's way different than when he's lost like 40 pounds. It was right, 40 pounds.
It didn't say the amount of pounds, but I mean, he's lost 8% body fat, so
it's a good.
So
chunk.
it's a smaller body.
Yeah. He's lost
a
a good
smaller
chunk.
body. And that's just going to require less calories just to maintain, Obviously, he's going to get to bring them up from what he was using to lose fat. But nevertheless, I think now is a good time to just kind of like get some really good habits rolling, kind of just build up these skills that are useful outside of just like fat loss or fat loss phases. Because if you're doing it right, fat loss phases should, be one of the smaller fractions of your time spent doing this bodybuilding thing. So I think in his case, I'm like, hey, you're probably still going to put on muscle because you're fairly new to training, but in regards to just all the skill acquisition it's just going to make things easier going forward, whether it's like losing fat for like beyond this point or gaining muscle, gaining weight purposely, right? I think it's a good idea to perhaps just kind of learn to chill here and maintain. And I think when you tell someone to maintain it, that itself can freak them out a little bit, because they're like, oh, I have to be this weight for like ever, otherwise I'm kind of failing. And what I tell people, it's like, hey, I think maintenance is like 5% up or down, 5% up or down. So long as you're kind of within those barriers, those boundaries, you're doing a pretty good job.
And that's probably
so
more.
I think
it's going to be more than likely a better environment to actually continue to put muscle on versus continuing to diet down. Like he's new, he's seen the newbie gains while dieting, but that's inevitably it's going to start slowing down in that deficit. Like he's only going to gain so much muscle the more he diets down. So like you said, those habits that he has now, Alberto, like it's going to be an easier environment to make those like solidified versus if he gets down to, let's say, 15%, it's going to require more of a demand to get there, more effort, more time. And then the question is, at 15%, what's the state? Where's the energy levels? Where's performance? Where's overall stress levels? Where's quality of life? Because factor in, you dieting down, it impacts life at points. It becomes a little more stressful. So it's not a bad idea, like you said, to kind of hang out here and get used to this environment and just basically solidify some really good habits, because, down the road, he's going to be in a better position to diet down to 15%, let's say, down the road. And he's not in that deficit where it's going to be really tough to continue to put muscle on. So that would be kind of my thoughts at this point.
Yeah, I've worked with some like big boys who like we've had some really good success. So we lose like 40 pounds and they're so pumped and they're like, let's keep going, let's keep going. It's like, no, hold up. Because if we go down further, it's like you have no idea what's in it, like what it's going to take to maintain that weight. But if we kind of just stop, live here for a minute, it's, you know, you're going to see just how many things you do have to modify, like compared to what you might have thought. So, and good chance to like just recharge, willpower, you know, like all things hormonal, you know, things like that, and shoot, get some weightlifting in that's like really progressive, because I'm sure it's been progressive, but they're going to see like it like level up just another notch. And I think that's important to see, especially when your first step with this bodybuilding thing was like, you know, a little bit more fat loss centric. That's what's going to hold you over during those phases where you're not going through fat loss, and you have to be okay with visibly seeing yourself get just a little bit softer. It's like the performance, it's the PRs. That's what I know really helps me just, you know, keep going with it, despite the fact that I'm running out of nice clothes, you know?
I mean, he's only a year into training too.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can't talk age. I know he's 41, but I'm 49, and I'm still trying to progress as best as I can. I'm still pretty productive in the gym, so I still think this guy has plenty of time to make some really good progress. I don't think like there's a short shelf life for him. I think he's probably going to progress into his 50s. So there's still a good decade or so ahead of him. So I don't think there's no rush to diet down to 15 or to get married to kind of some external sources out there that have kind of put numbers on things to guide people. I think that's just what it is. It's a guide, but you have to factor in. I always kind of talk about quality of life, because anytime you're in a deficit, I don't care how good you are at it, it's always going to impact quality of life to a certain degree. So that's kind of the question too, is like, okay, how are you physically, mentally, and emotionally? And also, how are you, you know, as far as life outside of, you know, bodybuilding / fitness? So everything has to kind of line up in order to, you know, just basically maximize progress, but also quality of life.
Yeah, and that's, you know, getting back to one of his questions he had in here. He says, how long do newbie gains last? 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? And really, with his context, you guys, he's only got a year under his belt. I almost kind of feel like because he's lost weight during this whole time, he's still kind of in his newbie-ish gains in a way. You know, I mean, it's not like when you very first start and you're going to be able to just get stronger and making muscle just starving to death. But again, he's eating, and now he's going to have the material to more efficiently build muscle and more efficiently progress in the gym. And so even though he's a year into his journey, I kind of almost feel like he's almost got a new lease on life right now. And I think the best thing that he could do for just long term, when he's 50, when he's 51, and 10 years from now, is at least get to maintaining his weight right now. And like Bert said, maintaining can be plus or minus 3 pounds, because he might find that he could gain 4 pounds. And if it's a good 4 pounds that he gained where he's reclaiming muscle and he's able to take advantage of these kind of newbie-ish type adaptations again, it's going to be a 4 pounds that might actually make him look better than he does now. Because it's so funny how, you know, people that we see that like analyze their DEXA scan numbers and their in-body test numbers just religiously, and they're looking at their body changing and they're going, wow, I'm liking the changes that I'm seeing. I'm looking leaner and I'm heavier, but I'm just looking so much better. And then they get their in-body test and it's like, how in the world did like 70 of my percent gains be from fat and 30% of my gains be muscle? Because it never looks that way. The numbers always say that, but it looks so much better on your body. And I think that's what he's going to find, is that even if he does gain, say 5 pounds, if only 1 pound of that is muscle, it's going to look so much better than the 1 pound muscle versus 4 pounds of fat that he gained.
Yeah, because I mean, the longer he's staying at the current level of body fat, I mean, he's going to continue training, but if the food level comes up, I mean, it's just going to make the environment that much better. It's like going from, like right now, he's probably leasing a Honda Civic Now all of a sudden you stop dieting, and now you're leasing like a hopped up Mustang. And now you got this powerful car. So now you're in the gym, you got all this horsepower. So you're gonna get a lot more power out of your engine. So you're gonna probably see better gains, not being in a deficit. And like you said, Brad, once he starts to collect a little bit more muscle, hopefully faster in a little bit better environment, like that current body fat level he's at now, he's gonna it's gonna look better over time because he's adding more muscle. And then like we kind of talked about, once all those habits are really solidified, he gets better at food and whatnot. Like when he does go to diet down again, whether that's a year from now, 6 months, 2 years from now, whenever, he's going to be that much wiser, and he's going to be able to retain that muscle a lot better on the way down.
Yeah. Word. I feel like we crushed that one. Berto, you got anything to add?
No, I think, it's, when you have a hobby like this, it's just good to, figure out how to make it mesh with the rest of your world, so little things right now during this maintenance phase, like, hey, going out to a restaurant and like not freaking out because like your steak has butter, things like that, like it's there's a lot of learning that's just going to set him up for the long-term success, because even at his age, you got so much time to keep progressing, man. Like this is like, in regards to like physical activities, like, this is one where you can go pretty hard for a long time. So, and again, congrats to that dude. That's
some good work there.
Good on him.
Yeah.
All right, question number 3. I listened to your mini cut podcast and it was great. Steve, mental note. Let's put a link up for mini cut podcast. As I understood from the podcast, mini cuts are for stopping you from gaining excessive body fat so you can continue to mass and build muscle throughout the year without getting too large. For someone who isn't competing and hasn't tried a mini cut before, would this mean that you could use mini cuts to aim to stay within a certain body fat range, such as 10 to 15%, as you slowly gain weight and build muscle, e.g. mass, until you're about 15% body fat, and then mini cut back to 10 to 12% cut, 10 to 12%, and then repeat? Or would you set a body fat limit 15% and keep massing and mini cutting until you feel like the mini cut wouldn't get you back below 15%, to which you then need a conventional cut to get back to 10% before repeating? So we have a little bit more context if you guys need it, but if I'm understanding it correctly, what he's kind of looking for is should he kind of like keep taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back until he gets to 15? Or should he get to 15 and then cut back down to 10? Anything else? Anything other context that you guys need?
No. Does anyone want to kick this one off?
I look like you wanted to kick it off. You're nodding up and down. I was like, okay, he's got something good.
It's like, what do we do to these shoelaces, man? Like they're, they're tied up, just a little bit. But I think for starters, just who knows? I think people are getting better at it. So let's give people some credit here in regards to like body fat percentage, because like people severely underestimate like what 10% is. Like 10%, I'd say, if you go to a decent show, amateur show, like that's the majority of the competitors up there, I think, they're like NFL wide receiver lean, basically. Like that's probably a good way to describe it. So, man, I think so much of this is up to personal preference, especially if you're not competing, because someone who is competing, it's like your target is always your contest weight. So like if you're moving away from it, like you just gotta kind of know where that fits in your timeline, and you have to be aware of that. So it's like, again, it's like powerlifters, like it's like, hey, so you're 5, 7, 10, 12, 1 RM are going up, but what about that 1 RM, right? It's like, that's what we want to get good at. So you have to just be careful in regards to how far away you get from that. With this person, I think, hey, it's more up to like personal preference, and you can just kind of gain and cut within the body fat, I guess, boundaries that you personally set up. It's like, hey, any lower than this, like performance kind of goes to crap. I get ultra food focus, hormones aren't feeling so good. things like that, and then the high end can be just like where, hey, like this is like too much for me almost. And just kind of play ping pong between like those two paddles basically. But again, that it's kind of up to you. Because I know some pretty hardcore recreational bodybuilders that's how they do it. It's like, I know this dude, it's like, hey, he kind of likes to roam on the leaner side. That's his thing. I have this other guy here who's just more on like the bare side of the spectrum. He kind of roams through here, but he goes through like gaining and cutting cycles as well. So it's kind of up to him. I think it's like his personal preference. In this case, it's like, it's the ultimate bodybuilding, because it's like, you're not trying to please judges. This is about how you like it, basically.
It sounds like he's kind of looking for like, what's the most ideal approach to, having the look that he's wanting. And I think a lot of times, a lot of people are confused because there's a lot of conflicting information out there regarding mini cuts. Do we gain for 4 months, then cut for 1 month? Do we gain for 6, cut for 2? Like, there's all these different scenarios and setups that's out there. And I think oftentimes people get caught up in the numbers, like the body, like it's always comes down to the body fat percentages. And like you said, 10%, like most people walk around 10%, the majority of them, they're going to feel like dieted, Mm-hmm. So the question for me, it's not so much a numbers question for me. It's more about, like you said, Berto, like what is going to give you the best look and also have you feeling your best, like at the same time. Because you can be, okay, great, I'm 10%, I look great, but everything else might not feel that great. You might feel food focused, you might not perform well, recover well. So I think it's not too many people at 10% they're going to hold that. It's more or less probably going to be closer to 15%. It's probably more idealistic for most people. So the question is, what is the best approach? And I always think about not what the generalizations are, but like you said, I need to talk with a certain individual and figure out what is the best approach towards their goals of building muscle, getting leaner. It's like, how long are we going to run gaining phases? And what is this person's life all about? Like, what's work life about? What's family life like about? What's your behaviors with food? The list goes on. So, all that context kind of helps me to decide whether, hey, this person probably shouldn't be cutting right now, or hey, they're okay to cut right now. And then the next question is, okay, how long are we going to run a mini cut for? I have one guy I work with. He's a coach himself, and he's a natural pro bodybuilder. So it's not like he's my athlete. It's more like we're peers, kind of just bouncing ideas off of each other. And we ran a mini cut, and we went a little conservative because in my mind, I'm like, okay, let's go slow. There's no reason to go fast. We're not doing a show anytime soon. We're just kind of clean some things up, but let's not make it overly invasive. So we did it. But he's like, hey, Jeff, I could have just did 2 weeks and I could have just ate chicken and vegetables and I would have been done with it and I would have been good. But that's his personality though. He's like, he's hardcore. If he can go hardcore, he'll do it. Whereas someone else who's more recreational, I say, hey, we're going to do chicken and, and broccoli or whatever for 2 weeks. They're not going to be able to last. And that's going to just set up all kinds of issues after that's done. So there's a ton of context to consider. And I think just personally, it kind of frustrates me when there's so much heavy emphasis on numbers. Like the ideal look is 15% or the ideal look is 10. Like we really don't know because it depends on the person, all that context. So I'm probably not answering the question for this guy. But it's kind of like Berto said, it's more individual. And I just kind of look at gaining muscle or losing muscle, or not losing muscle, but losing body fat. It's all about like the supply and demand, like the environment you need to be in. You have to be able to balance those things out as far as how much demand you got going out and how much supply you got coming in. So that's basically, it's hard for me to kind of just say, hey, you should be dieting this much, or go this route or that route. So I'm going to leave it there. I'll let Brad kind of chime in.
Yeah, I think if I was on a Skype call with this guy, and I was going to give him some advice. I mean, first of all, a little bit more context just for you guys so that when I'm done, you can chime in if you want to. This doesn't sound like a very big gentleman. I mean, he's 70 kilos, so he's low 150s. He's 5'6", and I mean, he's getting by, with 2,400 calories per day, which, I mean, for a 150-pound man, that's pretty darn good, Say, I mean, if I was on the phone with this guy, I'd be like, I'd almost take the two worlds that you guys just spoke of. Number one, quit looking at the numbers. Don't focus on the numbers. Focus on how you're looking, how you're feeling, and how you're performing in the gym. And at this point here, I would just say, just continue to gain some weight. Just continue to gain some weight. And like Berto said earlier with our previous call, or our previous gentleman, just kind of keep spending your time progressing and gaining weight the majority of the time, and then spend the minority of your time, or the least amount of time possible, cutting. So that basically you're on your road to just being, I mean, for lack of a better term, muscularly fat. But you use your mini cuts periodically to slow down the time period that it takes to get there from here. And so if that means that you're going to get to a point where you're muscularly fat, say about probably 8 months from now, use your mini cuts periodically to stretch that out to where it takes maybe a year and a half for you to get to that muscularly fat, kind of look that sometimes makes us feel uncomfortable, but is oftentimes what was the most productive years that we spend training. And then you can kind of say, well, okay, now I probably had better actually do some dieting and maybe get down to where I'm not quite so, muscularly fat, I guess you might say.
So you think there's a fine line as far as like the rate of gain? Like if this person, if certain people are gaining too quickly and they're getting soft and they're like, okay, now I need a mini cut. So the question becomes is maybe that rate of gain was a little too aggressive. So and my thought is, instead of getting to a point where you're like, okay, now I'm too heavy. Now I got to spend a couple of months cleaning this up, which is time away from the bigger picture of putting muscle on. Maybe the rate of gain needs to be more conservative. And it's just, in a sense, you're stretching the timeline out. And if you stretch that timeline out, it's not as aggressive. One, you'll keep yourself leaner. You're still going to be eating enough to put muscle on. And kind of like what Berto talks about a lot of times, you're going to be able to handle the behaviors a lot better, because you're not, like, if you put things on a graph, your gaining phase isn't like spiking way up and you're not having these big cutting phases. Like on a graph, it looks more consistent. So when you come in and out of these slight gaining phases and slight deficits or what have you, the behaviors are matching up with all those phases. So you're not creating any type of issues, when you're transitioning, to and from these things. What do you think? What do you think about that?
I think one thing we forgot to mention is just a clear. Well, he heard the podcast, but for the other listeners, it's like, what is a mini cut? And to me, a mini cut is, I'd say, anything that a fat loss phase is less than 8 weeks. I think 8 weeks is kind of like the beginner mini cut, and then, as you get a little better at it, it might be 6 weeks or so. But obviously, if there's only 6 weeks of fat loss, maybe 4 weeks, kind of depending on the person, they must be doing a pretty good job on the gaining side of not getting too fat, because it's like, hey, we got back to a spot to gain from, like, pretty rapidly. But they're not for everyone, like, that's for sure. I think most people would be better off with a more, I guess, a more general type of like fat loss phase. It just lasts a little bit longer, where you don't have to be as perfect. You're working with a smaller deficit. I went on a podcast a few weeks ago with Jared Feather, and it was the Revive Stronger podcast. And Jared said something that I was like, oh wow, this is perfect. So just like who mini cuts are for and who they're not. And what he said was basically, if fat loss, like relative to like muscle gain, like still matters about as much or even more, then a mini cut is not for you. Because usually that's how it is. It's like it's like a get out of jail card for people who can't handle that investment period. So yeah, like to me, like when I have the mini cut, it's like, damn it, here it goes. I have the mini cut. It's like, I know I have to, just because I don't want to get too far away from, I guess, like my peak shape. But to me, it's like, it's something that I dread, because I'm like, man, I'm gonna be hitting PRs and doing this and that, and it's not likely to contribute to like new muscle, I guess, so it's more like defensive lifting and doesn't get me as excited. So yeah, I think he put it really well when he said that, if, like mini cuts are for people that like muscle just matter. Gaining muscle is like the main objective. It matters far more than like fat loss to them.
Yeah, because I mean, ultimately, losing body fat is really pretty darn easy. There's not a whole lot to it, and it's very measurable week by week by week. So there's a lot of satisfaction to it. Gaining muscle, though, is much harder, and the time invested needs to be it needs to be almost longer than you think it should. So yeah, just a little capper on what you said there, Alberto.
What's going on, 3DMJers? Eric Helms here. Thanks for listening to our podcast. I just want to take a second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I put out with Greg Nuckols, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Dr. Eric Trexler, where we cover the most up-to-date, peer-reviewed research in the world of strength and physique sport that's directly relevant to your practice as a coach or an athlete. We provide our reviews in written format, but also, since you enjoy our podcast, in audio roundtable reviews where we discuss the research in depth. Finally, we also do video concept reviews where we cover a broader topic in video format for your learning. For fitness professionals, you can take quizzes on MASS content and earn continuing education credits for most of the biggest certifying bodies in the fitness industry. If you want to sign up and get a subscription, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and click on the Products tab. Thanks for your time, and thanks for listening.
Question number 4. 3DMJ has had many discussions on how using body fat measurement methods are not useful. That being established, how would you estimate how much weight a competitor will need to lose to get on stage if they've never been on stage? Let's say you know their starting weight, and could you visually assess their body at the beginning of prep? Would you guesstimate body fat percentage and factor in LBM, lean body mass, and water losses to estimate stage weight? So I'll just kind of kick this off with just 2 very, very broad answers to this question. First of all, whatever we think a person's stage weight is going to be, we always deduct another 5 pounds. Because it's always ends up being less than we thought. Well, I shouldn't say always. I'd say the majority of the time. There's very rare occasions where we actually end up usually being in the condition that we want and being heavier than we thought. Yeah, and I'll save my other responses for you guys when we chime in. But how do you guys assess what a person's stage weight should be when they've never been on stage before? That's kind of a key thing.
I'm not the numbers guy, so I'm not gonna ask a person to find out their body fat percentages or anything like that. It's more experience. Like if you ask me this question in the last 20 years, I'm going to come really close to getting within 5 to 10 pounds, probably more like 5 pounds, like you said, Brad, of plus or minus of where they need to be as far as a stage. And that's just through experience of seeing so many bodybuilding shows over the years and working with so many athletes. It's more just like intuition, kind of, if you will, just like seeing the physique, seeing kind of like in my mind, what kind of goes through it is, okay, how tall are they? What's their body weight? Okay, then I visually assess their physique, how much muscle looks like there's there, and then how much like body fat is there. Like if I can, let's say someone's like roughly 5'8", 5'9", let's say they're weighing 200 pounds, and you can barely make out some musculature. Like you can tell there's muscle. It's just hard to kind of identify, like, the delts from the arms and things like that. I'm like, that's probably a good 30, 35, 40 pounds they're going to have to take off. If someone's just like okay, there you can see some muscle, you can see some abs, you can see definition of arms, shoulders, more or less. I'm like, okay, that's probably like 15 to 20. So I kind of just look at it visually and kind of assess in my mind height, what their body comp looks like visually, and then I kind of just know through experience. If you would have asked me this question my first 5 to 10 years of bodybuilding, I would have probably told you a number and I would have been way off. So I think just as you gain more experience, and it's just one of those things where the more you look at bodybuilding, the more you expose yourself to it, you're going to get more of an eye for it. It's just like anything else in life that you have an interest in. As you partake in it more and more, you're just going to naturally get experience at it. So that's kind of how I assess it. It's not, hey, give me some measurements or anything like that. It's just more of an experience thing.
So, I mean, it's a subjective sport, right? And like sports analogies, there's like baseball, like stats and numbers matter a lot. They'll tell you a lot about the gameplay, what kind of player that is. That's why I love basketball, because stats are so overblown. It's like they're so overrated. It's like bodybuilding. Who cares if you have, I don't know, like 18-inch biceps? Like my quads in contest shape are like 23 inches, but like, who cares, you know? It's what Jeff said, basically. It's like, just show me someone, give me like neutral lighting. Don't get under like that yellow lighting that your gym has where it's like over you, that flying saucer lighting. And yeah, like usually I can like nail it right on the button. And if anything, when I give athletes I'll give them ranges. I can give everyone like their peel weight. Like this is like your appropriate for your division, like what it should be at like those top tier levels. But usually I'll give them a range because I don't want someone to try to kill themselves for something, like try to achieve something they're just not ready for. So if I think said bodybuilder 167 is your magic number, I'll tell you, you know what, 167 to like 174, somewhere around there. And that 174 is kind of like, hey, that's like entry level conditioning. It's like it's you can look good, no one's going to say anything about, you know, you being out of shape, but it's a relatively safe place to aim for. So whenever I do give people their projections, like I usually like kind of, because some people their first go, it's like, oh shoot, you got peeled, but that's just not always the case. So I usually give them a little bit of a range so that, you know, like if they only get to the 174, they're like, oh, okay, I did pretty good, as opposed to, you know, maybe embarking in something that they don't know how to do, or if they do, they're just not ready for it just yet.
I think a caveat is that, yeah, the range, that's what I do. Hey, give or take X amount of weight. But I think just think of that most people, when they're new to this or fairly new, they haven't really prepped, or they maybe prepped one or twice but never got like ultra peeled. You got to get leaner than you thought you can ever get lean. You're like, oh shit, yeah. I didn't know I'm going to weigh less than I was in high school. Like you're going to see some numbers that you're just like, no way, there's no way I'm going to look small. Like the thing is when you get in peeled condition, you're going to look bigger on stage because everything's showing up more. But yeah, in clothes as a natural bodybuilder, like I look like someone who's more, I mean, yeah, you can tell I'm a bodybuilder, but I look more athletic than anything. I don't look super jacked. At times I have people say, are you okay? You know, because you sure you're okay? Are you still training? So you're going to have to go further than you think. So if you, in your mind, you're kind of like, oh, I need to lose 20. It's probably like Brad said, you probably need to lose 25, 30. And you think about timeline. Like if you think you need 6 months to get in shape, give yourself 8 or 9. Because your first prediction is probably going to be off by a decent amount. So if you have enough time to plan for it, you could accommodate what you need to do to kind of get you there.
Yeah, you guys have hit the gut feeling, I think, right on the head. Because I'll be honest, when I have a first-time competitor and I need to guesstimate their stage weight, I hate it. I'm so thankful when it's like, okay, what was your previous stage weight? And it says 159. I'm like, yes. It's going to be between 158 and 162, and it usually always ends up being that way. But yeah, when it comes to first timers, I mean, here's the numbers things that I go through. Myself, I've never had a bodybuilder peeled, whether they are 6'3" or 5'7", be over 200 pounds. I've never had that. Either you ever had that? I know Berto has, because he's coached in SEMA.
I might have.
Craig
it's rare. It's more rare in natural bodybuilding to have someone over 200 peeled to the bone. Yeah.
Dave LeClaire, I've had a few guys that are just like... Yeah.
They're out there. So I think it's more rare than it is a general rule. Yeah.
So there's the first thing I always think of.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's always the first thing I think of. So then after that, I kind of go, okay, let's look at their height. Because if they're 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", they could be peeled upper 180s, upper 190s. Could be. Probably more like low 180s, kind of 170s. If they're 6 foot to like 5'10", probably going to be 170s, high 160s. And then, like Berto's joke in the recovery diet, it's like, if you're 5'9", you're peeled at 159 to 160 because that's what all 5'9" natural bodybuilder stage weight seems to be.
Not mine.
Well, yeah, we're not all the Godfather, that's for sure. But there was a time.
So
There was a time.
So yeah, there was a time I was 160 when I used to diet too aggressively and kill all my muscle. Yeah. But so in a nutshell, like you look at the height, right? Like height is that's the same thing I do. Even for females, I'll look at the height and then I'll look at kind of their shape and see what kind of musculature they have and kind of determine from there. And more or less, I'm kind of within range, 10 pounds or so, based on their height and kind of how they're looking as far as their body comp.
Yeah. And usually from there, I just kind of look at, like Jeff said, how much muscle do they have? How much of it is showing? Because muscle always kind of throws things off a little bit. It's kind of like I've seen people that are like, yeah, they got some abs, but there's obviously some body fat there. You know what I mean? And it's like they're probably only going to need to lose about 25 or 30 pounds. So I'm going to say 35. And then sure enough, they had to lose 40 to get peeled. Muscle always throws things off just a little bit in my mind. But yeah, usually, if there's a significant amount of body fat, I'm always saying 30 pounds minimum, probably closer to 40. If they're like, let's just say respectably lean, like just kind of like gym lean, I'm usually talking 25, maybe 30. And then, yeah, if they're like Instagram lean, minimum 15, 20. That's kind of like my last little numbers set as far as, like Jeff said, experience and what your gut tells you.
I mean, as you're dieting down too, like things change because sometimes, I'll kind of predict, okay, we're going to be this weight probably, give or take. Then as the process unfolds, I'm like, oh, you know what? Okay, it's probably going to be more like this, even lighter. And I've even been surprised too, where I'm like, whoa, it's like this person's actually going to be heavier than I thought. So I'm not perfect. It's just more estimating, but again, it's experienced estimating.
And I'd just like to offer, because I did that on a different podcast, like if anyone wants to send me like their pictures, I'll tell you more or less where you need to be. It's practice for me too. And it's always fun to see them come back later and they're like, you're pretty dead on.
Close,
so, yeah. Because I mean, it doesn't take up a whole lot of time. So yeah, you can hit me up on the IGs if you want to, and I'll let you know more or less where you need to be. We both win this way. It's practice for me, and hey, you get some info. So.
All right, fellas, I'm going to play game show host here. Do we want to answer a question on refeed timing, or do we want to jump into general cardio recommendations?
Ooh. Okay, the last one was fat loss. Oh, let's just do cardio, Brad, because I mean, you know some stuff there too, and that's always
cardio. It is winner chicken dinner cardio. How do you decide to implement more cardio into a regimen, and do you decide when it's appropriate to double their cardio, as opposed to going, say, 3 sessions for 300 calories burned per week to 4 sessions at 300 calories per week? You guys want me to start this, or does one of you want to jump in?
I can jump. All right. You jump in, Brad. I'll go after.
Okay. So first of all, I think we probably better just kind of get something right out of the way up front right now. When we're talking about cardio for weight loss, it's strictly to expend calories. That's all we care about. And more specifically, we're looking to expend calories to augment, to attenuate the caloric deficit, right? That's all we're after. We don't really care the source of cardio. We don't care how good your conditioning is, your cardiovascular shape. We need calories burned is kind of the bottom line. And so with that being said, we know that dietary adjustments have a better response for weight loss and fat loss than cardio, because they're true adjustments. When you take calories down, those are true calories that are subtracted from a person's intake. Whereas with cardio, it's a moving target. They might have started burning 900 calories per week, 300 calories per session, 3 sessions at the beginning of their prep. But as they've gotten in better shape and their body has gotten better at conserving energy, in all likelihood, after a few months of fat loss, they're no longer burning 900 calories per week. Their body's probably burning 600 calories per week. Plus, usually movement slows down. And so the amount of calories that they're burning from those 3 sessions at 300 calories per week is probably a lot less. And so the general recommendation for cardio, and guys, chime in here whenever you want to, is that we have to make them more aggressive in terms of getting the caloric deficit increase that we want, as opposed to subtle ones, simply because of the energy that is conserved as you go through prep. Adding another 300 calorie session might just get us back to where we started when we very first started. So that's why the dietary changes are they're more
precise.
They're more true calories. Yeah, they're more precise. And they get the result that we're after, ultimately. So for me, myself, I try to make big adjustments to cardio. And anymore, it's like we were talking about a little bit earlier, big adjustments to steps or just time spent. If it took an hour and a half to complete those sessions before, well, now we better take it to 3 hours or something like that. But because it's such a moving target anymore, it's for me, it's almost a go-to to make a big adjustment to cardio, either 0 to some or some to double, something like that.
And it's hard to quantify, because if I'm going to tell you a story that I had one athlete, and this was like 9-10 years ago. This is like when we first started coaching, in a sense. And back then we didn't really keep track of steps. So long story short, this person got deep into a prep and we stalled out on weight loss, fat loss. So calories at that point were already fairly low, and I didn't want to lower calories down, because one, obviously adherence is going to be harder to come by with that, and energy levels, etc. So I started to ramp cardio up, and this person went from something like 3 sessions a week, 400 calories per session, and we got all the way up to 6 sessions, 400 calories per session. So it was a significant increase, but yet nothing was happening as far as fat loss, nothing off the scale. And like a month went by and I'm scratching in my head. Of course, I'm like, something should happen here. So of course I'm like, hey, are you sure you're following your diet? Sure you're not cheating and whatnot? Promise you, Jeff, everything's on point. And it took literally about a month to kind of figure out that. And he kind of mentioned to me, and I was like, aha. He said, I've noticed lately that I've been sitting on the couch more, watching TV, taking naps. I'm like, okay, now I know what the problem is. So basically the calories were low energy. He's getting the cardio done, but the rest of the day, he's not moving anymore. So basically that cardio was just kind of just this void, because everything was just balanced out. So right then and there, I kind of knew, okay, that's the issue. So I think nowadays, the way I kind of think about cardio is kind of like you said, where it's just a tool to get calories burned. But I rely more on a step count because it's a more effective way to quantify overall activity. So if you give someone a step count, even if, let's say, their food is getting on the lower side, they still have to move. They okay, I have this target, I got to keep moving. So their overall activity level is still up. So as far as the cardio, I don't really say, hey, I want you to do X number of sessions, X number of calories. It's more just based off a step count. And I give them the option of, if they want to do, let's say, a light or a medium steady state cardio sessions, I just kind of have like a simple system I use. Okay, if we're doing 30 minutes of that, whether it's you're walking on a treadmill or you're doing light recumbent bike or elliptical, we're just going to equate 30 minutes as 4,000 steps. Whether that's truly 4,000 steps or not, it's not the point. That's how you're going to track it consistently. So it creates baseline. So if I need to increase steps, I say, hey, I want you to go from 10 to 12. If we need to, expend more activity, then they're going to get it done regardless if they're parking further away at a grocery store, taking more steps, cleaning their house more, or hey, I'm going to do a little bit more cycling. Instead of 30 minutes, I'm going to go 45 now to get the extra 2,000 steps he wants. So, and I really don't like to assign, let's say, quote unquote, hit cardio, like high intensity, because to me it's demanding and it can take away from weight training. So I want to think about balancing out supply and demand. So I know like steady state cardio is going to be less invasive. It's going to preserve weight training a little bit more. So that's kind of like how I handle the cardio sessions. So basically this question is based off of maybe the old ways we've used to do things versus kind of how we've changed maybe our stance of how we do things nowadays. And I know we did a podcast on this, so we can always reference to get like even more in-depth conversation on that. And I'm sure Berto's going to add quite a bit here as well too.
No, I don't have too much to add. He mentioned the amounts, like when do you use like a burst of cardio relative to where you were. I think that's, sometimes I like to start kind of optimistic. It's like, hey, we'll start with 2 sessions. So if you're not really doing much, it's like, hey, so it doesn't hurt to go from, we're using sessions back in the day from like 2 days of cardio to, okay, now we're doing 4, from 500 calories to like now we're doing 1,000. But if you have someone that's like doing, either 2,000 calories of cardio a week, or they're up to like 14,000 steps a day, at that point it's like, okay, like you can't double that number, right? You can't keep doing that. So at that point you're nibbling. You're probably telling your athlete, look, you're going to hate me, but at this point, especially if you have that much cardio going on, we're going to have to rely on diet a little bit more, and the numbers are going to look a little scary, but it's only going to be for a little bit. So steps like Jeff, that's more so what I use these days. And kind of depending on where the person lives, like sometimes there's a blend, because it's like, like I live up north or in the East Coast, like during the cold months, it's like, okay, that person's probably not going to get a whole lot of steps. So we'll do it the old fashioned way, at least part of it anyways. And the steps might just be something that, this is usually just what they get around the office on most days, just because I don't want them, because they kind of, it's like synthetic meat in a way, right? It's like they kind of just keep a person from, like just downsizing when it comes to activities outside of formal physical activities. So usually, again, like that first cardio move is usually a pretty big one, just to kind of set up that base. We won't use it until we have to, because a deficit should be there via diet. But then there's those people that, because, hey, they have a super sedentary life, like when the off season, we are doing 3 or 4 cardio sessions a week, just or we have a step count that might be, encouraging, instead of the 2,000 they would usually get, like 6,000. Obviously there's not a big burst there. We're kind of just going with what we have, but yeah, again, dietary adjustments, so much more predictable. And I think especially with men, you can get away with a whole lot more on that side of the coin.
On the diet side,
on the diet side. But yeah, no, step counts have been revolutionary, I think, because that used to be a huge problem where, that whole thing where, you would get their progress pictures and it's like, like your room's just getting messier and messier. And that's because you're not doing anything but like cooking your food and going to the gym, basically, So yeah. I miss my steps. That's the one thing I do miss. I'd rather not do them right now. So I look forward to every time I see Jeff out there, like especially early in the morning. It stretches out your day in like a really, really good way. So that's one thing about the steps relative to like the hamster wheel.
Yeah, and I think I would definitely encourage anybody who is asking about cardio recommendations to go to that most recent podcast that we did, because we do go over steps like just in depth, because they were such a godsend. And anymore, to be honest with you, I always like to get an audit of steps. I like to have, it's so easy. I mean, with our phones anymore, you can get a free app on there and you can track your steps and get a baseline. Okay, I'm walking 9,000 steps a day or 7,000 steps a day or something like that. Because then if we keep that consistent, anything else that we add to it, we are going to get the response that we're after. If we're always getting 7,000 to 9,000 steps, if like Jeff does, if he likes to increase steps, he can make a small increase and it's going to get the effect that he's after. If he goes from 9,000 to say 14,000, or like a lot of times what I'll do, because people do like to count their calories or something like that. Okay, I say, let's do 2 400 calorie sessions on top of the 7,000 to 9,000 steps that you're already getting.
Yeah.
It's got to be on top of it, you know? So if it's a treadmill, those are additional steps or additional time. But I've really gone 180 on the whole cardio. I used to be religious about my calories. I wanted my calories burned so I could deduct it from the calories that we took in, and I could figure out the deficit. And anymore, I mean, I love to have people track their calories if they want to. If they want to track their calories, they like seeing that number, go ahead. But next to that, give me the time that you spent. Because that way I can say, okay, 7,000 to 9,000 steps and 60 minutes of cardio a week. And it's a lot easier to calculate that way.
Gives you flexibility too, if you think about it. Like,
a ton of flexibility.
If you're accurate with nutrition, right, and you're accurate with your activity, then you have a lot more power to make adjustments. Like, okay, like a certain week or a certain day, even you're like, you know what, the weather's shitty. I can't get outside, make steps. The gyms are closed right now. I don't have cardio equipment. Okay, this week I might have to just slash my food instead of relying on activity. Or, you know, today I can't do cardio for whatever, or steps for whatever reason. Okay, I'm going to slash my food today to keep that deficit where I want it. So you can basically flip a switch when you need to. Of course, I would say probably when you're a little more experienced to do so, but you just, a lot more flexibility, a lot more tools to use under a specific context.
So yeah, for cardio recommendations, definitely look back to episode 134, because it'll go in depth to what we were just talking about here. All right, gents, question number 5 is, should refeeds occur on training days or rest days? I know that refeed days or higher carb days are important when dieting, but when should they be? Should they be on the select an area to comment on heaviest day of training, on a rest day, or does it even matter at all? I took the last one. You guys go.
Berto, you go.
Well, you know, with refeeds, I think most of us here, we do it, and most of us, not just like 3D Muscle Journey, but I think most of like the world at this point, it's like multiple day refeeds. So it's like, hey, you can do both now, and so it doesn't have to be one or the other. But I think the one where I have the most, pushback is going to be doing it on the day off. But to me, it's like that makes, if I had to pick one, I'd say doing it on a day off just makes a whole lot more sense, because it's like, so you got a little extra food and then you went to go beat the crap out of yourself because you're supercharged. So you feel supercharged at least for a few hours, right? So if I had to pick one, this is, I guess, one of those times where you can kind of like frame it that way, right? I'd probably choose it on days off. So typically, I try to have, if we're doing 2 days of refeed, which I'd say basically all my athletes have at least that 48-hour refeed. It's like one of those days, it's like, okay, we can train, but then the other day is going to be a day where it's like, if possible, could we also like not do a whole lot of cardio as well? Recovery. I think that's what's always like kind of falling, behind a little bit during your contest prep. So why not, take a day where you don't make the situation worse because you feel supercharged and try to close in the gap a little bit. So if I had to pick one, I'd say off days. What do you guys think?
I think for me personally, like I'm with you on that, because most of the time I'm strategically placing refeeds on non-training days for the recovery aspect. Let's fuel up, because basically, if you think about it, let's say you're dieting for 5 days. By the end of that, you're tapped out, you're depleted, and if let's say you have a little bit more food before a training session, the question is how is it really getting digested in time to actually do something for that training session? So, I mean, if you're doing a refeed on a training day, then it's almost like, is that extra food actually going towards the training? Does it have the time to actually get in your system and digest, and you're utilizing it during your training? I think if anything, it's more psychological. You think, oh shit, I got this food in me, I'm energized. So to me, it's like, it makes more sense. Hey, just put it on the back-to-back refeed days where they're non-training days. You're going to fill your glycogen up. You're going to have time to digest it, process it, and it's going to be there waiting for you. If you're refeeding on weekends, come Monday, you train again, you're ready to go. Like first couple of days of the week, you're charged, get some good production there, and make your harder training days like right after those refeeds.
Towards the tail end of a prep, I'll even have a person take 2 consecutive days off, and like especially if they're like lean, and it's like, let's just like eat up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, they think of refeeds when they're dieting as kind of a negative, like, oh, this is going to slow my progress down. It's actually the opposite. It's like when you have a refeed, you should probably see your body weight go up after refeed. If it's not going up, that means you could eat more, because you need to basically fill back up and get the glycogen stored up. You're just going to perk up physically, mentally, and emotionally. You're going to be re-energized. I think of it like if you're a race car driver and you've driven 100 laps, everything's wore down. Tires, gas is getting low, engine's kind of running a little funky. Pull that car in and basically get a pit stop, recharge, and then get back out there. So I think, for me, like I said, if I had to pick one over the other, it would definitely be like non-training days.
Yeah, I mean, I got nothing to add except for like the pit stop. Imagine trying to change the tires while the car's still running.
Yeah.
Right, still out there on the track, you're trying to change tires. That's kind of what it's like when you stick that high day on like your hardest day of the week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, ultimately, just to add and put the cherry on top of what you guys have said, I mean, ultimately, it really doesn't matter in terms of weight loss. Like in terms of weight loss and fat loss, it really doesn't matter, because I love watching the numbers. It's amazing to me how if I program somebody to be 14,000 calories a week, and they're on top of it. You look at the weekly numbers, it's 14,000 a week, 14,000, 14,100, 13,900. Even if they really screw it up and on one day they have a gigantic refeed and they just binge, but yet at the end of the week they were able to like rob the calories and still make it like 14,200. Yeah, there'll be a weight spike the week after, but at the end of 10 weeks, they end up losing the weight that we wanted. And it's amazing to me that the body works that way in terms of like the spikes and dips really doesn't matter. It's the consistency over time that really truly matters. So with that being said, if it doesn't matter really for weight loss, we got to do whatever we can to maximize recovery, maximize gym time that we can actually spend productively. And more importantly, a lot of times I want people to adhere to the protocol. And even if you feel like you tremendously benefit from having that on your hardest day, if you can't adhere to the protocol and you can't execute, stick that on a day where you can, even if you feel like it's suboptimal. A lot of times, we can get the best of both worlds. Let's get 2 days in. Let's make that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, whatever. But make it so that you can adhere to it. And if your weakest point is on Friday night, when you got to go out with the guys and gals, put your refeed on the Friday night. I really don't care. I just want you to adhere to the protocol. And if that's your weakest point and you can't adhere to the protocol, set yourself up for success and put it on that day, if no other reason than just for adherence.
Yeah, social settings. I mean, I do that too with people. Like if there's like some type of special date night or, birthdays and stuff like that, I'll maneuver some things like, hey, let's make this a refeed day, and maybe even give them a little extra. I had one athlete that just had a birthday, so we had a 3-day refeed. So instead of 2 days, we say, hey, we're gonna have 3. The birthday was a larger refeed, and then the 2 that followed were just a little bit smaller than our normal ones. But after the 3 refeed days, it all kind of basically balanced out to kind of the norm. And that way, stress levels are low. Hey, I don't have to go into my birthday like feeling restricted. I don't have to stress over, hey, I'm going over certain numbers or whatnot. So there's a little more flexibility and freedom there, and a little bit of excess food. And this person, let's get more context, is deeper into the prep, so we're on the leaner side. So this extra food is actually a positive and a benefit, especially prior to those three refeeds. We're on low days. We extended the low days out because in order to make this happened for her birthday. So she was coming off, I think like 6, 7, 8 low days in a row. So she was tapped out by the end of that. You're ready to basically get some food in her and fill back out and get the energy going again. So yeah, that's basically kind of my thoughts on all that.
On that note, when you liberate yourself from like having to have it on training days, actually small print with that, I think one of two things can happen is like some people will see some bigger spikes in body weight, so just kind of be prepared for that. But then sometimes there's people who just collect a lot of edema from their training, so sometimes you might even like lose weight. So kind of the same, but expect bigger spikes than your usual. But when you liberate yourself from having to have it on a training day, like what you guys have said, it's like, what if you have an exam? What if there's this one day you just really need your brain? It's like, you can throw it on that day because it doesn't have to be a training day anymore. So when we talk about flexible dieting, it's like, hey, when you know the rules, like you can make them, work for you a little better. So, yep.
All right, you guys. Well, I'm kind of sad because we've come to the last question of the podcast. I always enjoy these talks with you guys. Really, really enjoy it. Thank you to everybody, too, who wrote in the questions and who comments on, all of our videos. They're all greatly apprecited. We thank you for your support.
There's no more questions?
There's one left,
Oh,
Jeff.
okay. You scared me.
Okay.
I thought you said we had one more, but then you were saying
We got one more. So that's why I'm sad, because it's coming to a close.
You can't get emotional before. We got to do it afterwards.
All right. In regards to physique athletes in a contest prep, how low is too low for cutting calories and macros? If you have an athlete who isn't at the best starting place metabolically, parentheses, athlete is maintaining weight on low calories, close parentheses, how do you handle this? Once you can't cut calories / macros anymore, what strategies do you guys implement to further elicit fat loss? Well, this is a great question to end on because this could be a very, very in-depth answer.
Shoot. You want me to say something? I think to a large extent, the hormonal stuff having to be recharged is severely overrated. I think what happens is quite often when you have people trying to connect fat loss phases or preps way too close together, it's the adherence that's the biggest issue. And this is just from personal experience. I've had people who many times, or that was the situation. It's like, man, we're not losing, we're digging hard. And, in the back of my mind, I'm like, man, well, we had a 6-month off season or shorter sometimes. And then what ends up happening is many months later, because we have that sort of relationship, they're like, you know what? I think at the end, it was kind of on me. I was not being as precise as I needed to be. I was, little things were finding their way. I was not being as strict or as gung-ho as I know I need to be in order to make a contest prep work. So to be honest, I think that is just something that it just happens way more frequently than we think. And it's a tricky situation as a coach. And that's why I think it's now I know it's super important to really, really build that bridge of trust, because at some point, it's going to save them. It's you got to call your person out or really just have them examine everything. Probably a better way of putting it. And yeah, you can save them from, making this harder than it needs to be, or perhaps embarking in a prep that they're not 100% ready for. So I think, to be honest, a lot of it is more so on the mental side of things. And I've had some real tough competitors deal with that. People who usually I can count on to just be spotless. So yeah, just I have to say that because the underreporting thing, I think, is sometimes, skews what people think they're seeing.
Okay, so if let's say that they are just they're on top of it, they're weighing everything to a gram, they're licking every oat out of the oatmeal bowl, and their macros are spot on. And let's just say they are a small human and they just don't need a whole lot of food to just basically maintain their body weight, much less try to cut it, right? That's truly kind of the essence of what this person's asking. If, what Berto said, they're spot on with everything. The biggest thing that you need is you need time. You need plenty of time, because you're going to need to bounce in and out of dieting phases. You're going to need to have more. You're going to have to implement more high weeks and high periods that are probably not a surplus, but at least maintenance, and maybe have a day of surplus here or there. But yeah, it ultimately goes down to just a lot of time, because that's ultimately what it's going to take to basically coax your body into recognizing what little bit of a deficit. Because I mean, that's ultimately what it boils down to. You're going to need a 300 calorie a week deficit, and in order for that to mount up to any appreciable fat loss, it's going to take time. And then you got to bounce out. You got to try to get the metabolism revved up through a diet break. And sometimes it's a few diet high days, and sometimes it's a week, and sometimes it's 2 weeks. And then sometimes there's 2 weeks of digging, and sometimes the digging's got to be really invasive, and then you got to get out. And so, yeah, ultimately it just takes a lot of time, which most people don't want to hear, but unfortunately it is what it is. And you got to, if you truly want it, you're going to have to invest the time.
So is this person, I'm assuming this person is saying just they're starting a prep, calories are already really, really low, so they don't have like a good bank account really. They got low money, right? But we don't really know the size of the human. We don't know, or do we? And do we know even the activity level of this human? Are they sedentary? Are they active? Like if they're really active and their food is low, then that's trouble. But if they're sedentary and their food is low, let's get them moving more. See if we can actually have them eat more. That would be my first thought. Like, hey, before we even, get into and try to attempt a deficit, let's see if we can actually get you moving and get your calories up, and maybe increase your bank account. But I've had some people. I have one gentleman I'm prepping now. He's he's not huge in stature. He's on the shorter side, but he's pretty stout as far as muscle bellies. He's not eating a lot of food, and it's very surprising how full his muscles stay on very little food. So there's some people that they just don't require a lot of food, and you have to, in a sense, get pretty extreme as far as taking calories down and moving them quite a bit, like you said, Brad, in order to create that deficit. Then it becomes a balancing act of how much can this person handle and take? How many weeks can I push them before there's a breaking point? So it's like, okay, like you said, there's times you have to push, but there's times you need to back off and let them breathe and recover and then push again. So the timeline probably does need to be, extended by quite a bit for people who, like this gentleman, just doesn't require a ton of food to maintain muscle mass, and in order to get body fat off, we got to go extreme. But that would say that's a little more rare. But again, like initially, if I have someone that has really low calories and they're honest with tracking, and that's the case, but the question becomes is where's the activity level? Can I get this person to move more to maybe increase the food intake?
Yeah, and Berto, I want to throw something in your camp here, because you had a really good, I can't remember where I saw it because it seems like I see you everywhere, but you had a really good kind of a statement that you made one time that you're going to get weight loss from dieting. It's just going to take a matter of time. If you're a true caloric deficit, you're going to get weight loss to the point that basically there's going to come a point when you're going to die. And so, yeah, I mean, if the deficit is there and you're starving, you're going to get weight loss eventually. Now, of course, in bodybuilding, it's all about not just weight loss, but fat loss and muscle retention. But are you kind of familiar with what I'm talking about, where you talked about like the end result of like chronic dieting?
Yeah. No, you're correct. I think if like everyone can lose weight, otherwise, like, I don't know, like whatever we're doing to, I guess, blunt or damage our metabolisms, even like we should like sell that and cure world hunger, right? But what can happen is, I think especially when you've been dieting for a while, and you're pretty low calories and you're training hard, you're doing your steps, you're doing your cardio, is it the water weight thing just becomes a huge issue. And it's really hard to see through that. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, once you do a check of all systems, it's like, okay, show me what you're eating. Okay, like, just show me that everything's being done as precisely as we want it to be. At that point, like you said, it's just kind of a waiting game and being patient and doing things that, try to promote whatever, like the water retention whether that be it's like, hey, let's up our water some more. Let's kind of try to be. I've even had people at some point, like especially when we get to those phases, like try to have their last meal of the day be the same meal of the day at the same time, even if you're going to stay up 2 hours later and try to weigh in at the same time, little things like that, so that, but usually it's like, I know, especially if I know what we're doing should be working, and they showed me that, yeah, they're nailing everything. It's just so that they can see it more than anything. Because how many times have you guys had it that it's like, man, you've just like beat the crap out of somebody, and then the peak week starts, and it's like, say you're front loading them and you start them off with, a few, like 4 consecutive high days or something early in the week, and it's like, wow, like where is this like coming this from? Weight loss? Like just it's just right there. It's like we lost 4 pounds. But yeah, again, like towards the end, I think for most people, and it gets ugly for everyone. Like even for me, like the last 2-3 pounds, it does become like, I just have to laugh at the scale sometimes, because I'm like, I know that makes no sense based on like how shitty I've been feeling like the last few days. But yeah, like 10 calories per pound on average, I'd say, like, plus or minus a tiny bit, is about where most people will have to go in order to get into contest shape, plus, whatever cardio you might be doing. So yeah, no, it's tricky, because, there's like, fat's a relatively small part of like your total body mass at that point. And you have all these other things that fluctuate way more, playing a huge role in what's going on with the scale. It's kind of quite miraculous that we can weigh so consistently, like day after day, considering, everything that comes in, in and out, and just how different like every day is. But I'd say at the lowest end, 10-ish calories per pound, and like on a small chick, that looks kind of scary sometimes, Yeah, I had a 104-pound gal on that at some point. I'm like, oh wow, like, yeah, that's breakfast.
Yeah, and it's amazing, like you talked about, just the fluids. Like how many times do we see somebody that had a hard leg day? They're in a caloric deficit. They've been dropping like crazy, just like clockwork, and then you see their legs after a really hard workout, and their legs are just, you can see it. Their legs are beat to crap.
Just smooth.
They're smooth. They're soft. And their weight that day was up like 3 pounds. I mean, we're talking like almost a half a gallon of lactic acid and cortisol in their legs. Yeah. And that's not mass weight. That easily masks the 50 grams of fat that you probably lost the previous week. But yeah, sometimes it's just amazing, especially on leaner individuals, how you can see that water weight, you can see that lactic acid, and like sometimes it's systemic. Like when they just got in a fight with their significant other, or the friggin' dog ran away or whatever, their whole body just looks blurry. It's like it's just this systemic water weight.
Yeah. I mean, look at Eric's legs, like previous years compared to this year, and I think first of all we figured out a few things that made that happen, like cardio was a big one, but also just in regards to, this was the most chill, like in regards to his mental state that I've ever seen Eric, and like all of that just really showed up, and like his legs came in early. Like I never thought I'd see that.
Yeah. All right, gents, I think we crushed it.
We crushed it, and I'm sweating. Like, this is not like a nice shaved head, like Andrew said at the start. Before we started recording, this is like 95 degrees inside this office. So I'm sad we're coming to a close, but I'm also happy because I get to turn the fan on.
Yeah, same.
All right, you guys. Well, thank you for your time, and thanks to everybody that wrote questions. We greatly appreciate you listening and contributing to all of our content.
Hey there, this is Coach Eric Helms. Thanks so much for listening to our show. 3DMJ prides itself on keeping this show, our blog, and our YouTube channel as free and relevant sources of information for our community week after week. We also release additional free video courses as often as possible at 3dmjvault.com. If you'd like to help support our mission and our work, please consider becoming a monthly patron of our endeavors. Go to patreon.com/team3dmj and donate just a couple dollars per month to our cause to help educate and grow the drug-free bodybuilding and powerlifting communities worldwide. You can definitely choose to donate more, and if you do so, we'll send you discount codes for future use on any of our paid products. but any little bit helps, and we appreciate your monthly support in any amount you see fit. So again, you can start assisting the team by going to patreon.com/team3dmj. That's patreon.com/team3dmj. Thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you in the next show.